So before I start my story, I just wanted to show you the roof here on this beautiful day. It's the weekend after Thanksgiving, and there's snow out there on the mountains behind me. Welcome to my channel. I mentioned a whole bunch of ghost stories, and I'd like to explain a little bit before I sound too much like a kook. So I've had a lot of experiences with seeing ghosts in my life, and everybody's experience is different. So a lot of people, when they hear somebody else's experience, everybody almost, when they hear someone else's ghost story experience, it's going to be different than theirs. It's really hard to believe other people when their experience is different. But when I was a child, first of all, I grew up in a place where I was in Wisconsin, in a small town. I was bullied a lot, which I guess is a common thing for most people. But I used to hide in the bathroom in high school with my feet up on the toilet and eat my lunch because I was basically too shy to go out into the lunchroom and try to find a place to sit. And I felt like they were going to pick on me a lot and throw things at me and threaten me and get me in trouble with the teacher and things like that. So I just kind of hid out most of my childhood. So I found my escape in reading books, and I always wanted to grow up and be a writer, which is my dream, actually. I've written some screenplays, and I intend to write more when I get over my writer's block. But I hid out by reading a lot of stories, and my parents would buy me as many books as I wanted to buy because they wanted to encourage reading. So my big thing was buying stories about ghosts, stories about calls from the dead, stories about magical powers, and kind of my fantasy life alone with my cat reading these books. I really wanted to develop psychic powers, so I had a mobile above my bed, and I would focus every day on trying to move the airplanes with my mind. And one time I sat on the couch, I was reading a book, and I just closed it. I thought, I am going to get really serious about this ability to use my mind to move things. So I sat on the couch and I looked across the room, and my school books were sitting on a shelf across the room by the front door. So I looked at my school books and I thought, if I could move them, I would make them fall down to the ground. I imagine that they're going to fall. I'm going to push them with my mind. No, I'm going to let them fall. I'm going to dissolve the molecules under. I kept imagining different ways to try to move my school books. So I sat there a really long time because I had nothing to do in Wisconsin in the snow. It was like I really was intensely trying to focus on making this happen. And I'm looking at my books and looking at my books and kind of trying to find different parts of my brain to access where it's like peaceful or forceful or, you know, and all of a sudden my books fell off. They had been sitting there for hours and my books fell off the shelf onto the floor, like with a big slam. And it was the freakiest thing. So then I thought, okay, that doesn't really prove anything, because scientifically, maybe they were always sort of just barely balanced there, you know? So I thought, okay, what if I could make the books rise from the floor back to the shelf? That would prove that I had psychic abilities. So, I mean, that sounds impossible, but I thought, okay, if I could do that, that would prove that I have psychic abilities, right? As far as moving things with my mind. So I looked at the books and I imagined them lifting and being light as a feather and moving up, or, you know, I was like trying to imagine different ways they could go up, and I was looking at the books for, you know, maybe another 10 minutes, which is a really long time for a kid sitting on a couch in the middle of Wisconsin in a blizzard. So I'm like looking. I was alone a lot of my life as a child because my mom was off volunteering for causes in the 60s and 70s and 80s, even 70s. So now I just gave away how old I am. I'm looking at the books, wishing they would rise, thinking of them flipping back up, and knowing that if that happened, I would be scared out of my mind, but yet wanting it to happen, but kind of not wanting it to happen, you know? So I'm looking at the books, and the door opens. In the front door, my mom comes in, she goes, "Hi, Diane, how are you?" And she sees the books, she picks them up, she puts them on the shelf. And I thought, you know, that counts. That counts as they went up, they somehow, I don't know, I didn't tell her to lift them up. She just put them up there. So I had been focusing on something happening. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that's how it would happen. I know this is kind of a digression from seeing ghosts, but this whole psychic realm of being able to see the future, move things, see ghosts, it's all interrelated because it's the way you use your mind. So that was one of my earliest experiences with psychic abilities. The other thing is, younger than that, I used to sit in my room and I had this antique chair that used to belong to my grandfather who died. He passed away, I should say. Died sounds really harsh, and I think in my last video I said my husband died. Well, it's just a matter of life, dying. But my grandfather had passed away and I had his old chair. And I kind of loved him, but wasn't that close to him, And my mother always used to try to explain your conscience. She said, do the right thing because somebody's always watching. Like your grandfather, the spirit of your grandfather is always watching you. And I don't know if my mom put this idea in my head, but basically I would be laying in bed and my grandfather's chair is across the room and I was a super messy kid, as I am in adulthood. And I had like clothes draped over it and papers all over the floor and it was dark and I looked over and my grandfather was sitting in the chair. And this happened over and over again. And I kept thinking, well, maybe my clothes are laying there kind of crooked. I remember this one occasion where I was just like, well, I know my clothes are piled up in the chair. That's what that shape is. And but it was super creeping me out. So I'd get up and I'd flip on the lights and I'd look and my grandfather's not sitting in the chair. And in this particular case, I remember I didn't even have piles of clothes there, but I dismissed it because we don't believe in ghosts in my family when I'm a kid. And yet I read all these books, so I kind of do, because there's people that have written these books, some of them do. There's characters that do. So I kind of have a creative open mind about it. So maybe 20, 30 times I was scared out of my mind because I'd see my grandfather sitting in the chair watching me and it would freak me out and I didn't want him there because I was scared, and then he'd disappear. Or I'd turn on the light to check and he'd disappear. So that was one of the earliest experiences I had. But I really wanted to be psychic. I got books as a teenager and like a 20-something. I got these books like The Power of Healing, like the Hands of Light, I think one of the books was called. And I studied everything. I did all the chapters. I focused, I made a magic mirror, which is where you take a piece of glass and I just came up with this ritual where I added like hair from my pet and sand from the ocean, and I painted it black, and then it wasn't that reflective because it was a piece of glass painted black on the back. But I held it up and I was like, God, I really want to be in touch with you. This is what I thought. I always think I want good spirits only. I just want to talk to God. I was at a point in my life where I was questioning like what I was doing with my life, and I needed some inspiration, right? I don't know, I think I said something like, God, I just want to talk to you. And I took the mirror and I held it and I looked in it, and I didn't realize, but behind me was a window. I was sitting in my bed and I had a window behind my bed, and there were these big fluffy clouds. And actually in LA, it's very rare to have clouds. We have clouds today, but usually it's just a blue sky with no clouds. So I'm looking in the mirror and there's a cloud in the shape of God's face. I mean, like a guy looking at me in the mirror. And I totally freaked out and I was like, ugh! But I looked back and the cloud started changing really fast into not a man's face, but I felt like I saw the face of God, and I kind of tried to dedicate my life to doing good things. There were times when I was kind of dark and I didn't want to do evil things, but I just was like angry, and I kind of studied all this stuff about witchcraft or making spells because I kind of felt powerless and I wanted power, but in the end, I just went back to feeling like I want to be guided by only good spirits, God, whatever God is. If God is all the dead people that have been here that are back on the other side trying to help us, or my subconscious, whatever it is. So anyway, I wanted to tell you all the times that I've seen ghosts, which is impossible because it's a million, but those were my earliest experiences. There was a time I went to New York for an acting school, and it was a camp, and when it wrapped, I had an airplane ticket out the next day, but apparently we weren't allowed to sleep in the camp that night, and I didn't know where to go. So one of the other students, I was like begging him, he was going back to New York, it was in Connecticut, and I said, please, can I just crash on your couch, because I really don't want to sleep in the bus station. And the guy really was hesitant, and he never really told me why, but he was house sitting for someone, and they had this room that was all full of antiques. Maybe he knew something else about that room. So I slept in the room, and he gave me permission, and I slept in the bed, and it was the worst night of my life. I had so many dreams of, I don't know if they were dreams, but there were like people there was a man standing over me with a knife. There was a girl doing cartwheels. I saw so many ghosts. And the reason this happened is I didn't know it, but I had just before that acting camp become pregnant with my first child. And apparently the hormones of pregnancy does this to a lot of people. I became much more sensitive, and I was super aware of spirits around me or something, because that night I was just blown away. I must have seen 20 ghosts, and I was scared every time. My daughter says I shouldn't be afraid of ghosts. And the other thing is, in my house, when we saw ghosts, I basically did like this sort of little prayer ritual thing where I made all the bad spirits leave and only enter good spirits. And a friend of mine gave me holy water from the Pope, and I put that on my front door and around my house. I buried little bottles with crystals all around the yard. They call them witch bottles, but I'm not like an evil witch. It just was like one more little ritual to think about God, think about good things, and bless my house. This is another reason why my house was so precious to me. I had done all these things to make it safe spiritually. Oh, I failed to mention, there's a million times I've seen ghosts. I went to a haunted house, and my daughter's way more psychic than I am. I went to a haunted hotel thinking we were going to have fun seeing ghosts, but it was such an intense experience. It was in Springfield, Illinois, and I'm going to do a little series about that and go back, I think. Me and my daughter talked about it a lot. She used to say never ever did she want to go back. It was so scary. It was a good ghost. It was a nice ghost that was just trying to comfort her, but it was so freaking scary because it was so real, and your mind just rejects it. It's like, that's not what I was taught. So anyway, going back to my house, my haunted house that I loved. When I say it's a haunted house, it doesn't have a negative connotation like it's a scary, bad place. I showed you pictures of it. It's a beautiful, clear, light place with animals in the yard, like wild animals and birds. And I have so many bird stories. Birds used to hover outside the window and look in when I had my baby. Birds used to symbolize things, like when I needed to be told, like, somebody's there for you. Like sometimes when I needed to wise up, I'd hear an owl hooting, and it was like, hey, think about what you're doing. So that was a special place.